Hey, welcome to a new section in the course. This section is all about actually how to shoot video with your camera. In this lesson, we're talking about exposure, basically how to make sure your video is bright enough, not too bright or not too dark, with whatever camera you're using. So we're actually gonna head out to a real-world location where Sam is going to explain how to properly expose your video.
So now we're going to talk about exposure, and really what this comes down to is how much light is in your frame. And we decided to do this in Phil's kitchen just because a lot of times in documentaries or even shooting something for yourself, you want to be in a natural environment. So when it comes to exposure, light is really what we're talking about. It's how much light is on your subject, how much light is in your frame, and there's 3 ways that you control this. With a smartphone, you won't necessarily set these, but they will be affecting your image. And for DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, it's really essential. And that's your shutter speed, your f-stop or iris or aperture, and your ISO. So the first is shutter speed. Back in the day, for an old film camera, this would be you take a photo and how quickly did that shutter expose your piece of film. Now when it comes to film or video, think of every second this shutter is moving up and down, allowing light in. A slower shutter speed allows more light. A faster shutter speed allows less light. So currently I'm at 1/50th shutter speed. So let's go a little bit slower. Oh man, we're getting way overexposed here. Get the exposure. All right, so I'm at let's go 1/10th shutter speed. I'm now at a f6.3 ISO 200. And when the image is still, you can't really tell the difference. But Phil, if you could, there we go. See, the hand is all blurry. You can't really see it. If you're moving the camera, it has this weird sort of jittery effect. It can be really cool. And this is actually, a lot of people do this at nighttime to get a cool sort of ghostly effect. Now let's bring the shutter back up. And I just want to show that movement again at 1/50th shutter. And this is really what I consider to be the standard. So you can see there's still a little bit of that blur, but it's manageable. It looks more natural. Now let's go crazy. Let's go to 1/400th shutter. And I think this is where a lot of people go out into the day and they need to expose properly, so they bring their shutter way up. So I'm at 1/400th shutter, ISO 200, f2.8, and you can see there's a lot less blur on his hand now. It's a much sharper, crisper image. Some people like this effect. Saving Private Ryan's a great example of higher shutter stuff, but it can look a little too sterile, a little too digital for me. So personally, I like to shoot at 1/50th. Next is f-stop. It's how much light your lens is allowing in. So on the inside, there's an aperture. It's very similar to your eyes. When there's a lot of light, you'll have to close down the aperture, making a much smaller hole. If you want to allow more light in, you open it up. So we're at 2.8 here. You can see that the background's slightly out of focus, Phil's nicely in focus, and there's depth there. So let's close it down now to, let's go crazy. We're at f11 now, which for indoors is kind of crazy. So we'll bring the ISO up. And now you can see that a lot more is in focus. You can see the background image, you can see Phil in focus, everything's kind of in focus. So this can be great if you're running and gunning, or maybe you're trying to have everything just look nice in frame and everything in focus. For me personally, I love being as open as possible. I think having that shallow depth of field is really the look I prefer, but it's different for everyone. The final thing, and really as I've been adjusting all these things, the shutters remain the same. It's been at 1/50th. We're at f2.8, but the ISO is sort of the last piece to this puzzle. Really, what ISO used to be is it was the sensitivity of your film. It was how well did it perform in low light versus how unsensitive was it. If you went out into the sunlight and needed something that took more light to expose. So currently I'm at ISO 250, which is pretty good. And you can see now, let's go up to 1600. This is ISO 1600. It's so much more sensitive to light. It's way overexposed. I have to bring my f-stop all the way to f8 to look well exposed. So all these numbers do coincide with one another. To keep it simple, it's how sensitive is your camera. And at that, certain cameras perform better with higher ISOs. The reason that the a7S II is so popular is that you can shoot at these crazy high ISOs. Other cameras are not so much. For a smartphone, the ISO sensitivity really only takes you so far because it's just a smaller camera, smaller sensor, all these other things. So those are really the essentials for exposure, and as we go into DSLRs and other cameras, we'll get more in depth about how you actually expose your image and how you use these tools. Because if you're trying to really get serious about filmmaking, while this can seem daunting and like a lot of information, it's something important to learn, and really it comes second nature after so long. So we'll get to that later, and now we're going to be talking about composition.